Hi everyone, now we're going to review the facial bones of the skull. The facial bones of the skull are the bones that establish the architecture of our face and our oral and nasal cavities. These bones do not surround the cranial cavity. The keystone of the facial bones are the maxillary bones, or maxillae. So here they are right here on the multicolored skull. They're these two fused bones on either side of the skull. All right. So here you can see the isolated maxillae. Note that these two bones right here are not purple, and they are actually not part of the maxillae. Instead, these bones are your paired nasal bones. The nasal bones reinforce the structure of your nose. When looking at the anterior aspect of the maxillae, it is apparent that the maxillae give rise to our upper row of teeth. These ridges in the maxillae that correspond to where the teeth erupt are known as the alveolar processes of the maxillae. These two holes are known as the infraorbital foramina. Infraorbital foramina. The prefix infra refers to the fact that they are inferior to the orbital cavity. If you were referring to just one of these holes, you would refer to it as an infraorbital foramen. Now you can see that this part of the maxillae actually composes the floors of the orbital cavities. Going back to the multicolored skull, it's a lot more clear, all right, that this part of the maxillae that I just referred to clearly makes up the floor of your orbital cavities. At the posterior aspect of this part of the maxillae, you can see these diagonal slits again. I pointed them out to you in a video about the sphenoid bone. Do you remember what they're called? These inferior, or rather these slits are known as the inferior orbital fissures, right? What they are basically is cracks in the back of the orbital cavities that are between the sphenoid bone and the maxillae. While we're talking about the orbital cavities, I want to point out to you these orange bones right here and right here, all right? So they're at the medial aspect of the orbital cavities, and they're known as your lacrimal bones. At the inferior aspects of your lacrimal bones, you're going to see these holes, right, known as the nasal lacrimal ducts. These ducts are commonly known as your tear ducts. Extending posterior to the vertical part of the maxillae is this horizontal plate that you can see in purple. This horizontal plate composes the anterior 3/4 of your hard palate. As such, this part of the palate is also known as your palatine process. All right, or I should say more specifically, this part of the maxillae is known as your palatine process. I'm sorry, guys. This is my little dog, Riley, who wants to get up with me right now. But I can't let him up because this is more important. All right, so where were we? Okay, so right here, this horizontal plate-like component of the maxillae is known as your palatine process of the maxillae. All right, and it composes the first 3/4 of your hard palate. So what is your hard palate? Right, so the hard palate is this bony wall, or I should say probably a better analogy is floor, that separates your nasal cavity from your oral cavity. So with respect to this isolated maxillae, this area right here is going to be your nasal cavity above your hard palate, and then this area right here is going to be your oral cavity. All right, so posterior to this palatine process of the maxillae is going to be this bone right here, which has kind of a coral color to it. This bone is known as your palatine bone, and basically its main purpose is to make up the posterior 1/4 or 1/4 of your hard palate. All right, and so if I look at the multicolored bone over here, we can see again, this is the palatine process of our maxillae making up the anterior 3/4 of our hard palate. And then here, for some reason in a blood orange color, is our palatine bone, making up the posterior 1/4 of our hard palate. So finally, I want to tell you that the maxillary bones, or maxillae, also contain paranasal sinuses. In fact, they contain the largest of the paranasal sinuses. These are called your maxillary sinuses. They're so large that you could fit a quarter in each one of them. Right? They're located on either side of the nasal cavity. And this concludes our little tour of the maxillary bones.